Afternoon, good evening. Well, before I proceed and formally start today's activity, I would like to remind everyone to observe our Zoom protocol. 1, please remain on mute while our presenters are giving their inputs. We'll have an open forum later where you can ask questions or share your reactions. Number 2, kindly make sure that your name and the organization you represent are indicated in your Zoom name. And lastly, you may use the raise hand function during the open forum later if you want to participate. Good day, good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Perfect Storm, Debt Crisis, Stagnation, and the People's Fightback webinar. This webinar is initiated by the people of Overprofit, Asia Pacific Research Network, and International League of People Struggles. It is now 3 p.m. here in Kenya, while it is early morning in Argentina, late afternoon in Sri Lanka, and late evening in Australia. We have invited today speakers from Australia, Sri Lanka, Senegal, and Argentina to help us explore the perfect storm that we are currently in the midst of its fury. My name is Caroline Mudhoni Muturi. I am the coordinator of IBON Africa, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm pleased to be your moderator for our event today. I would also want to mention that we have interpretation for Bahasa and Spanish. So if you want to access the interpretation keys, kindly click interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom, then choose the language that you'd like to hear. We have Spanish and Bahasa once again. So to hear the interpreted language clearly, click on mute original audio. So we'll now go straight to the presentations. We have Peter, who is our main presenter, and we have reactions from Sandun, Ndemba, and Pascal. So let's go straight to the presentation. So Mr. Peter.
The People Over Profit campaign and ILPS Commission 2 for the invitation to present to you today on this topic on global debt crisis, stagflation, and the people's fight back. I'm speaking to you today from the land of the Kuku-Yalanji people in far northeastern Australia and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I'm sorry I don't have a camera working on this device, and I hope you can cope with my voice for this presentation. As the concept paper for today's webinar has set out, current global economic conditions are characterised by slow economic growth and high unemployment, while the prices of basic commodities such as food and fuel are skyrocketing. Even the World Bank Group slashed the global growth forecast to 2.9% for this year, from 5.7% last year. Global inflation is projected to increase to 6.7% this year, twice the average of 2.9% that prevailed in the last decade. Inflation rates have doubled in 37 out of 44 advanced economies. Turkey has recorded the highest inflation rate at 54.8%, while the United States has also reached 8.6% with its consumer price index, the highest since 1981. Argentina now has an inflation rate of 71%, and Ghana at 31%. So these are very high rates, and there are other countries that are much worse. The World Bank Group blamed the stagflation on the Ukraine-Russia war, the current global health crisis, and supply chain disruption caused by COVID lockdowns in China. It also warned that the global stagflation is similar to the 1970s, wherein the required increases in interest rates to control inflation were so steep that they led to the global recession in 1982. This is the current trend, forecasting a string of financial crises in emerging markets and developing economies. As well, I should add, as in like countries like Italy. Moreover, global debt has reached an unprecedented high of $303 trillion US dollars, surpassing by a long way the numbers in the 1980s crisis, with government borrowing accounting for more than half of the increase. In 2021, government debt per region is highest in South Asia, closely followed by Latin America and the Caribbean and the Sub-Saharan Africa. The COVID-19 pandemic has severely impacted countries' repayment capacity due to the increased crisis spending and the shock to the global tourism sector. Low-income countries are experiencing the brunt of this crisis, and new loans were created for the recovery, or the so-called recovery, of these economies, and thus they've fallen deeper into debt. The 2020 COVID-19 economic slump, described by the International Monetary Fund as a recession we have not seen in our lifetimes, wiped out jobs and worsened inequalities. Many countries in the global south were left with meagre resources to address the pandemic after decades of financial integration that tied them to volatile whims of foreign capital. The debt problem, lingering before the pandemic, only deepened. Countries were left with limited choices, driving them to more loans. So while 2020 or 2021 did not yet see the full-blown debt crisis, the current conditions show that countries are still on this path. Even according to conservative IMF estimates, global public debt, that is debts incurred by governments, rose by 20% alone in the year 2020, which was unprecedented in the previous 50 years. In its own estimates by February 2020 and also June 2021, the IMF stated that 36 of 70, or half, of the low-income countries are either at high risk of or already in debt distress. At the same time, 70 low-income and middle-income countries have an annual health financing gap of US dollars 370 billion, according to the World Health Organization. So developing countries' total debts, just a moment, developing countries' total debt stocks reached US dollars 11.3 trillion in 2020, according to the UNCTAD, or 2.5 times the post-2009 crisis figures. Developing countries will have to pay around $936 billion in debt servicing through to 2030. That's 571 in principal and 365 billion in interest payments, especially on government bonds. Before the pandemic, countries such as Lebanon, Pakistan, and Argentina had already been experiencing debt problems. And since the pandemic, Chad, Zambia, Ecuador have struggled to pay their creditors and have sought debt relief under current frameworks. And we know the crisis this year in Sri Lanka. What kind of problem is debt? So now to address more general analytical tools we might use. So debt comes in many forms, but the most powerful form is an advance of capital for productive investment, enabling the further exploitation of labour and the environment to create profit and to reproduce and expand capital and labour. The role of debt in economic management was analysed by Keynes, an economist, during the Great Depression, and his theory of money and of macro demand management was broadly adopted by capital from 1945 to 1975. However, that is when the stagflation mentioned in the concept paper struck the global capital system, and what was known as Keynesianism could not overcome it. So going back to that word stagflation, it meant high inflation at the same time as very low economic growth or even recession, whereas normally economics expects inflation to take place with a roaring high level of economic growth. Now, a combination of Marxist and Keynesian analytical tools could have explained this stagflation, but the solutions coming from these voices were unacceptable to monopoly capital at that time, which instead opted for a neoliberal solution led by British Prime Minister Thatcher and US President Reagan. Multiple factors underlying the 1974 global economic crisis were the US financing of the Vietnam War, the shock of the 1973 OPEC oil embargo and subsequent spike in real energy prices, and the maturing of the main developed market economies, the USA, Europe and Japan, after the long effort at post-war reconstruction. The US dollar was delinked from gold and then floated, revealing massive inflation, and the new phenomena of petrodollars gave the global banking system a huge challenge. From 1968 to 1974, there were powerful worker movements in Europe, North America, and Japan trying to lift wages and expand worker democracy as the post-war economic boom hit its peak. And at the same time, the Vietnam War exposed the moral bankruptcy of the global system. One of the major impacts of this crisis in the developing world of newly independent former colonies was the recycling of the petrodollars into loans. The dynamic here was one of global banks urging loans onto governments and private companies in a competitive frenzy, rather than using the prevailing banking culture of tight-fisted risk assessment to ensure that loans would be secure and perform well. This is when the term casino capitalism was applied to the new reality, where risk was played off with ever more exotic bets on derivatives. The Reagan administration chose to crush inflation in the 1980s by savagely raising interest rates, which in turn created a global recession. These interest rate hikes were particularly cruel in the poorer countries, which were saddled with those sloppy petrodollar loans from the 1970s. As country after country went bankrupt, the combination of the IMF and the World Bank moved in with their structural adjustment programs. In the core capitalist countries, members of the G7 and some other OECD countries, governments themselves created structural adjustment committees, implementing trade liberalisation, privatisation and labour market deregulation, while squeezing the welfare state. Soon after, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and global capital moved into a new frenzy of neoliberal euphoria with the creation of the World Trade Organization. At that moment, the transition at the end of the 1970s, there was an option for a worker-led solution to the crisis, with proposals for an extended welfare state, worker-controlled industries, a bigger state sector, especially in the commanding heights of finance and technology. Within the United Nations, there was a push for a new, fairer international economic order with a fairer trading system. Big capital led by the US monopoly capitalists, were clear-eyed about this democratic threat and united in their efforts to at first contain it and then roll it back. So you can see so many parallels between that huge crisis of 1974 to 91 and today's situation. The political universe today is completely different from that time, but the economic situation, and particularly the role of finance, is uncomfortably similar. The huge gush of cheap money from the inflationary funding of the Vietnam War and from the petrodollars is more than matched by the huge flow of zero interest funds into the system since the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack on the New York and Washington. I've left out this in my paper, the funding of the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, the Great Recession of 2008-09, and during this recent COVID-19 pandemic. On the other hand, workers worldwide have had their wages stagnating for decades due to strong global anti-labour policies, including greatly expanded temporary migrant labour schemes and the conversion of many, many jobs to casual or contractual rather than regular employment status. Workers have had to take on debt to maintain buying power, and there is a limit to how much they can bear before something gives. Speculative bubbles in residential property, shares, and exotic items like Bitcoin are a feature of our time as capital desperately seeks some kind of return on investment. Just as in the 1980s, big capital is demanding that inflation be brought under control by a rapid increase in interest rates and that state budgets be brought back into balance. We can see central banks around the world in the last few months have mostly decided to make even more aggressive rate rises than they had been advising. They are also saying that they will begin to cut interest rates sooner than expected as they try to avoid a global recession. My humble opinion is that there is no avoiding a severe recession, and that much of the commentary today about efforts to avoid recession are well-meaning but not coming from the decision makers. These explanations offered by the World Bank Group that this current debt and stagflation crisis is caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and by the economic impact of COVID-19 and are shallow. They're not very serious explanations, and they're designed to distract from the deeper toxic dynamics of capitalism. The broad picture is that capitalism has been operating at lower growth rates since the 1974 crash and since the Great Recession. It has been propped up by transfers from taxpayers and workers during these decades. Wages have stagnated for decades, while corporate profits soared at record levels during the pandemic. Despite the obvious needs of humanity for radical transformation of energy systems away from fossil fuels and for action on inequality and broader ecological damage, big monopoly capital cannot and will not agree to address these needs. So what shall we do? Turning to the people's fight, we can see the immediate response is to call for subsidies or other controls to restrain the prices of basic commodities, as well as campaigns for wage increases and to extend trade union organisation. In some countries, more social democratic pro-worker governments have been elected, or, as in the case of Sri Lanka, a corrupt, tyrannical family has been removed from executive office by people's action. This is because the immediate experience is the squeeze on incomes because of the spike in the cost of basic commodities. Depending on the political conditions, the people's demands can vary from wildcat protests through determined negotiation and onto political change and even to social revolution. To trade unions, the capitalists argue that any wage increase will increase inflation, even though the facts show that wages are not a contributing factor at all in the current inflationary surge. In broad terms, debt is not inflationary until it becomes so huge that there is not enough real economic capacity to harness it. But clearly, the debt taken on by central banks, governments, corporations and households in the last 30 years is way beyond global economic capacity. The workers' movement must be very assertive to combat this conventional wisdom that wage increases cause inflation. This argument was addressed by Marx and Engels so long ago in their pamphlet Wages, Prices and Profits, where the argument that one man's wage rise is another man's job was debunked. Prices are set in markets, but the underlying limits of prices are set in the production process, in the struggle or negotiation between capital and labour about how much profit will be extracted from the worker's labour time. The crucial factor in today's capitalism is the extraordinary concentration of ownership of capital in different sectors, such that the largest corporations can raise prices in the market without fear of any competitor cutting into their market share. The only way that workers will get increased incomes is through struggling for wage rises through industrial action. This kind of campaign will have to confront monopoly price fixing by political demands for price controls. This kind of combined industrial and political struggle took place in the past, especially in the post-World War II period. The lessons of the gains and limitations of these struggles must be applied now. In the broadest terms, these lessons are that capital will try to contain the workers' demands to purely economic terms, while the workers need to assert the political and social dimensions of their demands, insisting on a transition from capitalism to socialism. It is a struggle for social power that lies at the heart of this crisis. The immediate prospects. Except for a few countries with pro-worker governments, most nations are going to have a political alliance between imperialist capital, local capital, and the national government against the workers and people's demands. There will be a global recession with a wholesale reorganisation of capital and markets at the expense of working people and the environment. This crisis will provoke more and more resistance and demands for more far-reaching democratic change. It will also provide more space for the already developing fascist movements to seek to attack minorities as a scapegoat for the crisis and thus push back on behalf of big capital against the potential for working class unity. The minorities under attack are already clear: migrant workers, Muslims, LGBTIQA plus people, women, and Jewish people. While there are many socialist organisations around the world, they are not united on the kind of analysis I'm putting forward here. They often compete with each other in youth and student circles. They often have little real contact with organised workers and farmers. That is a great weakness. However, the lived experience of working men and women is a great teacher. And history shows that in the series of crises around World War I and the subsequent Great Depression, that determined organising by principled socialists could educate and mobilise millions of people to struggle for a socialist future. We are somewhere at that point. There is a compelling economic, political and social crisis unfolding and a huge educating and organising opportunity. I hope that some of the economic and political concepts I've used in this presentation strike a resounding chord with you and help us to seize this opportunity in a systematic, methodical and enthusiastic way. Thank you very much, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for your great presentation. And thank you for clarifying to everyone about the dangers posed by high debt, stagnant growth, and inflation. I'm pretty sure most of the participants here have observed in their own countries how the prices of basic commodities like food and fuel have skyrocketed, while the wages and income of our workers and farmers have stagnated or have gone down. In Kenya, it's actually terrible. I will share that later. So now, to reflect on what the main speaker has discussed, I'm going to invite our reactors to share about their context in their different countries. We have Demba Dembele. Demba Dembele is the director of ARCADE, which is based in Senegal. And after Demba, we will have Pascal Duarte from Argentina. He is from the National Committee of the Coordination of ILPS Argentina. Then our last reactor is Sandun, who is from Law and Society Trust that is based in Sri Lanka. So welcome Demba, Pascal, and Sandun. And kindly note that you have only 7 minutes. Please observe time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. I'm sorry I have to call. Yes. I am sorry my camera doesn't work either, so I am really sorry for that. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you, Comrade Peter, for this very strong analysis of the global crisis, of global capitalism. And I am giving you a perspective from Africa. As you know, Africa has been one of the main victims of neoliberal policies since...
Hello, Demba. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Hello? Hello?
I can hear you, Demba. Carolyn, what's the problem?
Hello?
I can't hear Demba.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you. Demba, we are, both Peter and I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
So can I continue?
Please go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. So as I was saying that, as you know, Africa has been one of the main victims of neoliberal policies since the early 1980s. And that has not changed, despite the utter failure of the IMF and World Bank policies and the failure of neoliberal globalization, capitalist globalization. Africa is still one of the victims of these disastrous economic and social policies. In terms of what's happened in Africa during the pandemic and now with the war going on in Ukraine, you know, during the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, the situation has deteriorated in Africa. Our main exports are in raw materials. Prices went down because of slump in global demand, as Peter just explained. And for the first time in over a quarter of a century, Africa experienced recession. Africa as global, its GDP was contracted by 2.1% in 2020. Imagine what impact, socially speaking, such recession could have. According to the African Union itself, over more than 40 million Africans fell into extreme poverty as a result of this contraction and all the other measures dealing with the coronavirus and its consequences. But this is a global picture for Africa, but it's even worse for the least developed countries. As many of you know, more than half of African countries are in the least developed countries category. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in its 2020 report, I am quoting, the pandemic will push LDCs in their worst economic performance in 40 years, end quote. This is a UN agency that's just giving a very bleak picture for the developed and least developed countries. And of course, the African countries, like many other countries, faced huge financial costs to face the pandemic, health, economic, social consequences. But what is worrying in the African debt picture is that more and more countries are going to international financial markets through Eurobonds. So between 2000 and 2019, according to the African Development Bank, the commercial debt on African external debt, commercial debt rose from 17% to 40% today. And at this pace, it could even be higher than the public debt. And as you know, during the pandemic, African leaders called for the debt cancellation in order to free up resources to face the consequences of the pandemic. Unfortunately, that call was not accepted by the big powers, especially the G20 countries. They came up with what the so-called debt suspension initiative, which was a failure. A country like Senegal got just less than 15% of its debt suspended. Debt suspended in 2021. So,
excuse me, Don.
Yes?
You have a minute left.
I have a minute left. Okay. And of course, all this picture was worsened by the war in Ukraine. As you know, cuts in supply chains. African countries are food dependent, and you know what it means. And now inflation. Some of the biggest countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and others have double-digit inflation. And of course, all this has dire consequences for the people in terms of jobs that are lost, in terms of poverty, more poverty. But people are struggling, are fighting back. And in Senegal, I can give you just in terms of conclusion, in Senegal, the left allied with other movements have been able to defeat the ruling coalition during the parliamentary elections just 3 weeks ago. They lost their majority. Now we are almost 50-50 at the parliament. And we hope in 18 months, with the general, the presidential election, we hope to see a progressive coalition come to power, control both the presidency and the parliament. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Demba. Next, please let's have Pascal. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias por invitarme. Soy Pascual Duarte de Argentina. Le hago una breve exposición sobre la combinación entre la crisis estructural y la coyuntural.
I'm going to do a brief presentation about the crisis of structural and conjuncture in Argentina. The previous government of the right-wing Macri contracted a monumental debt with the IMF for $58 million. Of that amount, almost nothing went to reserves or works. They escaped through financial maneuvers, bonds, and securities. The current government, far from ignoring this debt as fraudulent, recognized it, and with this, has mortgaged our economy for decades, condemning millions of Argentinians to hunger and poverty. The government of Alberto Fernandez is staggering in the midst of the political, economic, and social crisis without taking a single measure to confront or at least contain the concentrated power groups. Structurally, a handful of large monopolies, local and foreign, associated with financial capital, control and strangle the possibility of any growth with possibility of redistribution of the wealth produced. There is a critical situation where more than 50% of the population is below the poverty line, including large sectors of registered workers. Inflation has skyrocketed, projected 90% per year. In a scenario of budget cuts and general increases in basic services as a result of the removal of state subsidies. The open scenario after the war in Ukraine has unleashed the bidding for natural resources and has caused the domestic prices of food and other commodities, whose prices tied to other currencies, to skyrocket. In order to try to put a brake on the crisis, to avoid resignation or greater setbacks, the ruling classes have temporarily agreed to force a little democratic forms and put at the head of the government a new leader over the president himself. Few days after the assumption of the super minister, Sergio Massa, of the Ministry of Economy, it is clear the decision to deepen the course of adjustment and surrender chosen by the government in the face of an economic and political crisis that shows no signs of closing. He ratifies the objective of adjusting state spending even more, with real falls in pensions and public salaries, tariffs, trying to cut local consumption, increase exports at any cost, and obtain foreign currency to guarantee payments to the monetary fund and other usurers. Sergio Massa is the leader with more closeness and obedience to the U.S. Embassy of the three main forces of the front of all. This is evidenced by the visit to the U.S. Ambassador Mark Stanley at his diplomatic headquarters 4 days after his inauguration, for the permission of the Inter-American Development Bank to release loans withheld from the previous administration. The new minister's announcements are clearly aimed at the markets, the exporting multinationals, the financial sector, the large agricultural businessmen, and the companies food prices, to promote the reduction of state spending while promoting the coverage of the needs cut with more indebtedness, together with more mining, hydrocarbon, and agro-industrial extractivism. The 15% in pensions of the announced bonus do not reverse the misery that extends over those who receive the minimum retirement, trying to keep pensions contained and to liquefy their weight on the budget in times of high inflation. The lack of definitions regarding the generalized wage increases and the updating of the so-called vital and mobile wage go in the same direction, favoring businessmen who see their profits increase with the fall of the wage expenditure. The workers' and popular movement repudiates this turn to the right of the government of the front of all, which will encounter more and more popular resistance with protests, marches, and a plan of struggle, as shown by the mobilizations of the last weeks, in spite of the break attempted by the complacent political leadership in the so-called union bureaucracy, who in several cases have been forced to propose measures of force as a result of the pressure of their rank and file. In view of the situation, in order to achieve measures in favor of the people, it is necessary to advance in the annulment of the agreement with the IMF as a first condition for a different economic plan that advances with the nationalization of the banks and foreign trade, establishes state control of the big exporters, and supports the income of the working class, that confronts concentrated business power, that puts an end to the predatory and the extractivist model that seeks to put an end to the crisis, but by making those who always win pay for it at the expense of the effort of the majorities. Strengthen the construction of workers and popular strength, promoting in the streets and road the struggle and unity toward a new power of those from below. Strengthen tools such as the self-convocation. Strengthen tools such as the self-convocation for the suspension of payment and investigation of the debt, the Forum for Sovereignty, and the National Meeting of Workers and the People. Solidarity with the people of our continent and the world who face the plans of the IMF and World Bank. National and popular sovereignty toward a patriotic, popular, and anti-imperialist solution to the crisis.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pascal, for your presentation. At this point, I would like to request the participants to kindly indicate your name and the organization you are representing. And next, I'll invite our other reactor from Sri Lanka. Welcome, Sandun.
Thank you very much. Hope I'm audible here. So thank you very much for the opportunity. So I will not go into deep into the crisis in Sri Lanka because I'm sure that you all have already heard about it, and the previous speakers were also talking about what is happening all around the world. So what's happening in Sri Lanka is exactly the same thing, and maybe little worse than some of the countries at the moment. So as you know, during last few months, Sri Lanka started feeling much of its worst economic crisis. And as citizens, as people in the country, we started feeling it when the fuel in the filling stations are running out and people had to stay in queues for a number of days to get their vehicles fueled and then to get the cooking gas. And we saw then the essential medicines are running out and people are started to die in the queues and without medicines, and then the food prices has increased. So it's the same story as everywhere else. And what we have seen, it's if you see the reasons for those things, it's basically we as a country is running out of foreign reserves that we need to pay our debts. So if I just give you few numbers, so for example, in this year alone, Sri Lanka has to pay $7 billion USD as our debt services. But by March, we only had around 1.9 billion USD as our entire foreign reserves. So as you can see, the crisis in the economy, where then we had to default our foreign debt payments, and that has resulted in a lot of foreign suppliers for fuel, medicine, and food and everything refusing to provide their supplies to Sri Lanka, and we are kind of running out of everything. So I will not go into the crisis if you can but I will more speak about what's happening now. So as a result of this crisis, with people going through this kind of real difficulties, facing their finding their day-to-day essentials, and especially young people who kind of
Excuse me, kindly slow down
Sure. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
So what we have seen over the last few months with what's happening in the economy, where people were running out of essentials and electricity, fuel, medicine, and food prices, food inflation has been skyrocketing, and people who got kind of angry about what's happening in the country, people who were angry about the sheer neglection from the political class and the ruling elites about the crisis, and young people who were scared about their future started coming out to the streets. So from March last year onwards, we have seen thousands of people who were coming to the streets of the country and were protesting every day. And if you I'm sure you've been familiar with what was happening in the country. Like people were occupying various places in Colombo, and one occupied one place which they have occupied in front of the presidential secretariat. They were protesting more than 100 days continuously from March 9th onwards, April 9th onwards. They were protesting in front of the presidential secretariat, occupying the main gate of the presidential secretariat and the surrounding areas. For the first time in the country, we have seen thousands of people coming out every day. There was days where hundreds of thousands of people coming out to the streets. And finally, on 9th of July, we have seen the biggest mobilization in the recent history of Sri Lanka, where more than 500,000 people stormed into the capital, and people stormed into the presidential secretariat, presidential house, and the prime minister's office, and people occupied the place. So the president we had that time, who in 2019 got one of the biggest popular mandate of the country. He got more than 2/3 of the votes, and who kind of identified himself as a strong leader, which had a heavy military backing, and were highly in favor of the militarized a centralized power structure and a militarized rule. But people's power was so powerful. Within a day, president has to leave his house, leave his office, and then leave the country. And he has fled the country, and later he has resigned. And then we have a new president. But sadly, the change in the regime and the new president who came in has so far, but he's not been able to fulfill what people were asking for. People who came into the streets, young people and everyone who from various parts of their lives, they didn't just ask for food, medicine, gas, or daily essentials. They were asking for political reforms. They were asking for a political reform which allow people to be part of the decision-making processes. People were angry about the political system we had over the last few decades, which didn't allow people to be part of the decision-making processes. We know we are talking about the indebtedness of the country and how high it is at the moment. But none of us were part of those decisions. Most of these loans that's been taken were spent on building highways, ports, and airports, and everything else, which doesn't have a real value to the ordinary citizens. We didn't benefit from those loans, but we were forced to pay those loans. So people were angry about this. People were angry about the corruption. People were angry about the economic decision-making that has happened over the last few years, which didn't allow people to be part of these processes. So people who came into the streets asked for those reforms. They asked for economic reforms, and they asked for political reforms, which allows people to be part of the decision-making processes. But sadly, what's happening now, the new government, which came into completely closing down that spaces. And now they say now they are once again going back with the IMF agreements, and they try to show the IMF is the only way forward. And Sri Lanka is currently negotiating the 16th agreement with IMF. So it's clear the IMF is being part of this process all along. Sri Lanka has been working with World Bank, ADB for last 4 decades. So they were part of the problem than the solution. So they were part of this economic system, which
Sandu?
Yeah, sorry. I have 1 minute.
1 minute.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, so they were part of this process. They were part of the problem, not the solution. But new government once again wants to push the same old agenda back to the people. So they know that if they try to push it, there will be opposition protest from the people. So now they want to completely suppress these people's protest, and there's a huge government oppression against the protesters. So today I came from court where 6 of our comrades been arrested and got bailed out today. But over the last 4 months, more than 3,500 people been arrested just for being part of the people's struggles, non-violent, peaceful people's struggles. There's 3 student leaders currently being arrested under Prevention of Terrorism Act. So they try to frame the student leaders, trade union leaders who are leading this struggle as terrorists now. So Prevention of Terrorism Act in Sri Lanka is one of the most draconian piece of legislation. So they are trying to use that against the protesters. So their motive is clear. They know they don't have any solutions, and they know if they want to go with IMF, there will be serious kind of a protest and backslash from the people, because people will suffer from what IMF is proposing. So they try to show that IMF that we have the capacity to oppress people, curtail their protest, and make their conditions viable. So that's what they do. Sadly, without introducing real, genuine reforms which people were asking, they try to completely oppress the people's struggle and put down IMF conditions forcefully onto the people. So I will stop here now, and then we can discuss during the discussions. Thank you.
Your presentation. So I would like to request the participants, for those who have questions or comments or any sort of concerns, you can raise your hand, and then we are going to unmute you, and then you can ask your question. As we wait for the participants to ask their questions, we have one question from Oliveros from ILPS Africa, and he's asking, the crisis of the 70s was a game changer. It led to the dominance of neoliberalism, which in turn brought more hardships to the people. What should ILPS members do to help the masses face this coming and possibly worse economic crisis? Over to you, Peter. I believe that it's directed to the lead speaker.
Thank you, Caroline, and thanks for the question. It's a strategic question you're asking. I tried to suggest some things in my final remarks. The education of ordinary people about the social power conflict that's at the heart of the crisis. This is what we have to do, so that ordinary people understand who is causing this great crisis and who are their allies, who are going to be the ones they can work with to change it. So it's a big education and organising challenge. That's what we have to do.
All right, so thank you for your precise answer. I will go to the next question from Just Peace. And before I read that, kindly participants, I'm requesting you to include your name and the organization you are representing when asking a question. Do we have any hands raised? Maybe. Yeah, we can ask.
There is a person raising their hand. Yeah, Kadir.
Yeah,
Can I speak? You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you for letting me to speak and sharing with others. I think for people's fight back, the peace is very important because it is the base of the development at all sectors. So must move direct to stop all fighting because the people, between the people at national side, and find solution for this problem. It is for people fighting back. And for debt crisis, I think the governments must looking for improving the agriculture, manufacture, education, health, and economic sectors to prevent the debt crisis. This is my idea. Because the development, it is very important to stop the fighting back and solution for debt crisis. I think this is better. That's right.
Well, yeah, that's right. Thank you so much. I agree. And I believe other participants and panelists agree to this. So I'll read the question. Do we have another hand raised? Okay, so I'll read a question from Just Peace. He's saying that the main purpose of trade unions is to win the best price for laborers. We support them in principle as we defend workers' rights. Also, organizing trade unions serves to raise workers' consciousness. Socialist unions are few. I think that workers need to organize outside unions. I think that workers need to organize outside unions. For one thing, not all workers are in unions, that's true. Workers organizing associations, cooperatives, campaigns, and joining in larger anti-capitalist causes will win more success. So what does Peter think about this strategy? Peter, what do you think about that strategy?
Okay, maybe Demba can also comment on this one too, but we should try to have workers organised in their independent organisations so that they can assert
Sorry? Hello, Peter. Peter, are you okay?
Sorry, I have a bad cold. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I just want to answer by saying that we shouldn't pose organising workers in unions against organising workers in other sorts of cooperatives or associations. These are all the same struggle. And if we cannot win majority of working people to support socialist solutions in one field, I doubt we will achieve it in another. But in every country, the situation is different. The history of the unions is different. So it's not up to me to sort of say, what's the right answer for everyone. But the main thing is to try to unite all working people, and lots of different organisational forms for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Kindly let's also have other reactors share their thoughts on that.
Can I?
Demba.
Yes. I can give the example here in Senegal. We have trade unions. Do you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me? Okay. Here in Senegal, we have several trade unions that are not formally affiliated with political parties, but they are close to some left political parties here in Senegal. But still, as the speaker said, many workers are not in trade unions. Therefore, political parties have to look beyond trade unions if they want to have some influence with workers and put them into the struggle for their own interests, of course, but also for the interests of their own country. I think that's an add to what Peter said.
Yeah, thanks, Demba. Pascal, what's your thought on this?
Yes.
Caroline, maybe you
Pascal?
to repeat the question for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me repeat the question. And I'm told that the question is from Barbara from Just Peace, Just Peace Committee in Canada. Yeah, I needed to clarify that. And Barbara made a comment and then was asking about what we think about the strategy. And he says, the main purpose of trade unions is to win the best price for laborers. Support them in principle as we defend workers' rights. Also, organizing trade unions serves to raise workers' consciousness. Socialist unions are few. I think that workers need to organize outside unions. For one thing, not all workers are in unions. And workers organizing associations, cooperatives, campaigns, and joining in larger anti-capitalist causes will win more success. So what do you think about this strategy? Pascal?
I can respond only in Spanish, I think. Julia is there?
Pascual, I think Julia already left, so we don't have Spanish interpreters.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think you can maybe do your best.
We have a little trouble because my English is not good to respond. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe Caroline, we can go on to the next question if there are any other questions and address it to Demba or Peter.
All right. No problem. Yeah, thank you, Pascal. So the next question, we have a question from Tetet Loron. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrongly. So she's asking, I would like to get the speaker's thoughts on how people can effectively challenge and reshape multilateralism so that it will lead to a democratization of global economic governance. So I'm going to direct this question to this main speaker and also to all the reactors except Pascal. Yeah, Pascal cannot communicate effectively in English, so we can have Demba and Sandun. Welcome, Peter.
Okay, Caroline. Thank you. I think it's a big question, Tetet. What I would say is the very, very forceful statement by the Sri Lankan people about the unfairness of the system is a sign of where to go we really do need big movements of working people protesting directly about the crisis we're in now, which is mainly, I think, impacting people in terms of supply of food and other basic needs at affordable prices. So it's about the struggles which demand increased incomes to cope or controls to stop this monopoly power that's used to raise prices in situations like this, where there's just super profits being made by just a small number of companies. So whether the struggles are political ones or they're more looking at economic questions, they have to have this international system as part of the focus of the demands. That's what I would suggest. We have networks. We are talking to each other here tonight across the globe, but there's many ways for people to work together. But clearly, understandable demands are a basic part of any strategy, to take us forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Demba?
Yes, thank you, Carolina. I think it would take a big struggle to get to what Ted said. Africa has been asking for a seat on the Security Council for decades, but nobody is listening. Africa is asking for a seat at the G20 group. Some are saying, yes, we are now, we will accommodate you at the G20. And even at the Security Council level, some countries are now supporting Africa. So it takes a struggle from both states that are being marginalized, but also from people's organizations. Another example I can give, it's the least developed countries that are now preparing for the 5th UN conference in Doha next year. They are asking to be, they are asking for more consideration in decision making at the UN and outside the UN. And we, as such organizations of the least developed countries, we are pushing for that. We are looking for allies in our countries, in our regional organizations to push for that. So I think it's a combination of struggles from states and from civil society organizations that could help get there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, Sandun, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, before I go to that question, I have like a small thought about the previous question about also about the role of trade unions, which our previous speakers also spoke about. So I think what we have seen in Sri Lanka, so I think there's no doubt about the importance of trade unions as a body of which organize workers and the role of trade unions in the positive reform process. But also, if you see what happened in Sri Lanka, for example, the most of the people who kind of came to the streets and be part of the struggle were not members or believers of these traditional trade union structures or left political parties or anything. It was more of individual young people who were fed up with the system and wanted to change something. So I think as trade unions, as left political parties and traditional political parties, I think we have to seriously rethink about how we kind of address this community, these young people. The way they communicate is different. I think most of them mobilize themselves through social media and other platforms, and they communicate a different language, and the way they mobilize themselves is different to the a traditional way of us being organizing workers. So I think there's a challenge for us also as people who come from the traditional trade union left background to see how we can kind of address to this mass populations, what has to be changed to address their demands. So I think there's a challenge for us also. They, in a way, challenge us also. So we need to rethink about our strategies. And also on the second question about like the democratization of the global economic regime, I think that's like key here is how people win back their right to decide what they want. I think it's extremely sad to see, like, after few decades of IMF, World Bank programs, and IMF, World Bank ran economy, and we had to face like multiple crises in several years. Once again, we go back to them. And once again, we think they are the alternative and they are the only option available. For Sri Lanka, after 16 World IMF agreements, and once again we are in crisis, and we think they are the only option we have. So so I think we have failed as social movements, people's movements, to capture that space. We can't do it as at national level alone. We have to have like a global people's movement which capture that decision-making power. So it should go beyond us asking World Bank to do reforms. It has to be way. I'm not exactly sure how we can do that, but we have to capture that spaces. What like really hardening for me in Sri Lanka, for example, people went and capture the president's office. So it can be symbolic, but it in a way is a symbolic way of like how people went. Like presidential office and palace has been the most powerful places in the country, and it's been like the highly militarized, highly secured places where no like civilians were able to enter. I think global economic regime is also like that. It's been so like restricted to elites and businesses, and no one is able to. So like people entered into the presidential palace, we have to find a way how we break down these barriers, break down these walls, and enter into this global economic, like break into the global economic agenda and put our agenda there. So rather, other than that, if we like continue this, once again in 5 years, we'll face another crisis and we'll say, okay, IMF is the only option that we have to go to them. So we have to build our own economic agenda. For that, I think social movements across the world has to come together to build that alternative agenda.
Wow. Thank you so much for expounding on that. And I would also want to ask you another question. Someone is asking, Miss Dewi Amelia, she's asking, I would like to hear the smallest reform happened in Sri Lanka nowadays and the prospect of movement there. I think she wants to understand about the reforms that happened in Sri Lanka and the prospect of the movements in Sri Lanka. Maybe you can quickly answer that.
I think I don't like, so because like it's all happened during last 4 months, no? So I don't think we have like really achieved a lot of reforms within the system per se. Still, like people are still pushing for that. There's still a long way to go. I think what we have achieved now at the moment, for example, in the country, so we had a regime which kind of like, we had like a one family rule in the country, if you know family about Sri Lanka, like we had like one popular, like one most powerful political family which runs the entire country, which has close link with military, which kind of like control and all the aspects of the economy and all the other places. And like highly corrupted, centralized power, which kind of treated like marginalized communities and kind of like marginalized the minorities and everything. So what has happened with the struggles at the moment? We were able to kind of like at least temporarily like move that entire family out of the regime. So at the moment, at least now they are out of it. And then we have a space to engage in some sort of a political discourse with the regime. And there's I think we were able to kind of like remove the militarized structures within the regime at the moment. So that will enable us some sort of like, so we are currently working for a constitutional reform, which kind of reducing the powers of the president. And so we are not really happy with the current government has agreed to bring in the constitutional reforms. We are not still happy with what they have proposed, but people are still fighting back. So we are looking for a better constitution which provides more decentralization of power, more space for people to engage in the decision-making processes, and also a constitution which kind of ensures economic, social, cultural rights of people. So if we are still fighting for that, and hopefully it will something that we can go for. And the biggest political victory we have at the moment, we have that kind of a political awakening within the citizens. So Sri Lanka, we thought that will never happen. Sri Lanka was a highly polarized society where we were like divided based on ethnic lines, religious lines, everything. But now at least there's a common political platform where people from all groups coming together and demanding reforms. So I don't think we haven't like really achieved a lot of reforms, but we have created that platform and space so we can continuously push for those reforms. At least that space has been created by now.
All right. Thank you so much. And at this point, I have like 2 minutes. So I'm going to invite all the speakers once again. And I'll give you only 1 minute to, give your last comment. And then we'll come to the end of this. So, Peter, then the reactors. Just a minute, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Caroline, and thank you, everybody. I think what I would just build on what Sandul just said, that the struggle in his people's struggle in Sri Lanka has created a space, opened up a pathway, and shown people that change can be won by people's struggle. So we need to do that because we are all living through now a very, very profound crisis, global, very dangerous crisis. If we don't act, it'll only be worse and worse for millions and billions of people. So let's take the time, make the priorities, and find the way to struggle for really profound change together. Thank you.
Demba?
Yes, thank you. I think what I can just add to what Peter said and what has been said here is that we are in the face of a deep crisis of global capitalism. And everywhere, people are fighting back. And I think there are some victories we have seen, like in Sri Lanka or elsewhere, even here in Senegal. So let's keep fighting and let's strengthen our solidarity across the continents. And I think if we do that and we keep our optimism, we know we can win against this system and bring about a new system that's good for all our people from Africa to Asia to everywhere else. Thank you for inviting me, and God bless you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Pascal?
Thank you so much. I wrote in the chat response to the question. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's your comment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to read it. Pascal says, regarding the question about multilateralism and the possibility of advancing towards a democratization of world governance, I believe that in the first place, more than multilateralism, what is happening is the emergence of new powers that compete for markets, influences, and as such are preparing for a new distribution which deepens the trend towards war. Therefore, we should not get excited about a democratization of governance among such imperialist actors, but rather prepare to intervene as forces of the people towards a progressive and rebellious way out of the global crisis. Wow, thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for the highlight. So, Sandun, just
yeah. So,
few seconds.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with what others have said. Like, I think global solidarity is what we need at this moment. So, because what we can see, like, although the global powers, the local powers, the economic powers, although we all experience their failures as like this crisis is a result of their failures. But we also know how determined they will be to hold into their powers. What we can see in Sri Lanka is that, like, how far they can go, use their military power, their police power, and use every legal and like every other means of curtailing or suppressing people's struggles to keep their power. So we know the pressure from the other side will be so much. So we need a global solidarity. We need global solidarity for Sri Lanka. We know the people, the young people who are on streets will be in real danger within next few months. We know they will try to use anti-terror laws against these young people, especially students and everyone. So we need global solidarity for that. And same in the other countries. We know that the operation in other countries will be same when people decides to challenge the power. So we need to work together. We need a global solidarity. So hopefully these discussions such as this will kind of create these platforms where we can build solidarity across countries, across regions. So we can have a global power which can kind of challenge the power structures which put us in this place at the moment. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all our speakers and our participants for the active engagement. At this point, we are not going to take further questions because of the interest of time, but I'm going to request all of us that we have a sign-on statement that I have just shared the link in our chat box. So kindly, as part of the continuous efforts and struggle against debt crisis, stagnation and people's repression, we are inviting you to sign the sign-on statement. It's from the people of a profit, the organizers of this event. So kindly, you can see the document. The link has been sent through the chat box. Kindly consider signing. This is part of, our call. And as we come to the end of this webinar, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for participating and for your time. I'd like to thank all the speakers, all the participants, and of course the organizers of this event. And also take this opportunity to invite you to our subsequent meetings. We have one on September 9th on debt crisis, stagnation, and people's fight back. It's organized by Asia Pacific Research Network. We're going to send you the invitations officially. Thank you so much, and all power to the people. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Caroline.